Though most eyes in the United States continue to be on Mar-a-Lago or the Trump Tower in New York City, understandably so, since there's a lot of things are going to be changing in the United States and therefore around the world once President Trump takes office this coming January. There are still things going on around the world, and the war in Russia-Ukraine has not stopped or even slowed down, though it has moved off the front page headlines to many of the people here, but not all of them. As you can see on the screen right there, both Zelensky and Sursky, the commanding general of the Ukrainian forces, have said that they are currently staving off 50,000 troops of Russian troops, and that now includes allegedly 10,000 North Korean troops in the Kursk region as Russia continues to move to close that off. Now, we've been talking about this really since August 6th when the incursion first happened. We pointed out that militarily, this was an unimportant part of Russia. It posed no strategic or even operational problems for Russia. It didn't have any key military targets. And it was just going to be a huge waste of resources and a diversion of desperately needed aid elsewhere. Personnel, especially trained personnel, equipment, reportedly well over 1,000 pieces of military equipment have been destroyed in there, and various reports from anywhere from 10 to 20,000 Ukrainian casualties. Of course, it's impossible to validate any of those, but that is continuing to go on. And now then, one wonders if the Ukrainian side is not finally coming to grips with it, and they're setting the stage for a withdrawal. Because now then they're putting this big number out there, and it's unclear whether this number is actually accurate or not, but it seems that they are trying to hype up how big of a deal it is, especially with the North Korean soldiers themselves being officially part of it, to paint the picture that, well, it's just too much for us. We may have to withdraw. Now, that's something that should have been done probably before the month of August was out, when it was clear that the initial objectives, actually all of the objectives, not just the initial ones for the Ukraine side, were a complete failure. They didn't accomplish any of the things that they wanted to. They didn't get as deep as they wanted. They didn't even come close to threatening the nuclear power plant that was in the region, which was always going to be way too far for the troops that they had. And then the other big thing was that they wanted it to cause Putin to have to withdraw troops from the Eastern Front, where they were making progress, to cut off this issue with the Kursk area, and that never happened. We've also pointed out to you before that the Russian side did not take this threat very seriously, and they were not that concerned about it. Immediately, within just days, they put up a big, large perimeter around it that prevented any further penetration, and then started methodically destroying all the troops that were in it, causing extraordinary numbers of damages, continuing to keep open this gaping wound that required Ukraine to continue to put reinforcements in there, to send badly needed resources, et cetera. So this turned out to be a huge albatross around the neck of the Ukrainian side, one of their own making. And now, Gary, if you could throw that map up from the Institute for the Study of War. Again, I have my normal caveat that the ISW is terrible with analysis, but really good map making. And this one here shows what you see in the blue area in the center there. That's the territory that the Ukraine side still has. And as you see, the walls are literally closing in everywhere. And a particular damage up in the top, you can see this red area where there's like a finger kind of going into the middle. And then in the very top upper right-hand corner, you see another red finger moving in, and it's potentially going to cut off the last avenue of escape for all of the Ukrainian troops in that top portion. So they've nearly completely cut that off. And then it's literally just a matter of time before they push the rest of them out. And it just doesn't make any sense at all for the Ukraine side to keep this open. So I truly do hope that this is Sursky and Zelensky trying to lay the public relations foundation for withdrawing their troops out. It's not going to change the outcome of the war. It's already sealed, but it can save some of their troops. And even if they just wanted to put them onto some of the other fronts, I mean, that would at least slow down the Russians in some places. But having them up there is nothing but a death warrant for it, because there's nothing to accomplish. And it's just, frankly, strategic malpractice to keep the thing open any longer. And I certainly hope that they move them out there. But that was always a dead man walking operation for the Ukraine side. And now it looks like we're probably getting close to the end game on that portion of the front. Now, speaking of the North Koreans, there's also recent news in that as well. Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin signed a deal with North Korea actually solidifying their military alliance. There has been, and this is actually now a month or so old, actually almost two. As of August, there were reports that up to 13,000 military transportation, those big military vans you see on shipping containers, those really big corrugated steel things. 13,000 of those have gone from North Korea to Russia since they began their military support. And now it is officially a military pact, which requires both of them to come to the aid of the other in case either is attacked with, it's unspecified exactly what that would mean, other than it would be an immediate response. So now then, congratulations. We have now provided the impetus for Russia and North Korea to actually have a military alliance that did not exist before we went engaged in this war beginning in February 2022. Now, some may say, oh, well, that's not our fault. We didn't invade. It was Russia that invaded. Fair enough. And that is accurate. It was Russia that invaded in February 2022, but it was not without provocation and actions from both Ukraine as well as the United States that led up to that. The Ukraine side themselves have been increasing their military posture along the lines of the separation between the eastern part of the Donbass that had rebelled against Kiev after the coup that happened in 2014. And the Russian side had been supporting them all this time. But then I think it was May or April of 2021, Zelensky signed a public law that said that the Ukraine side would seek to return the Donbass to Kiev's control using force if necessary. And it was like literally days or a couple of weeks later that Russia began its buildup on the force. And then that turned into a meeting where President Biden met with Putin, and Putin allegedly told him at that meeting that if you continued on to put NATO into Ukraine, there was going to be war. Biden said, yeah, whatever, we're going to do what we want to do. Jens Stoltenberg got the same message, and later that year from Putin, and he publicly said, yeah, I know. He said that was the cause of war, and we said, yeah, we're going to do it anyway. So how that's not working out for us. So because we said at the time, nobody is going to tell us who can and can't come into our alliance. Nobody gets an outside veto. We alone say what it is. So because of you won, you showed how strong you were. Now then, Russia is a lot stronger than it was in February of 2022, much stronger military, poses a significantly greater, even conventional threat than it was before. The animosity between the West and the East is off the charts compared to where it was. Economically, things are worse for the West because of all the sanctions, and then now they're requiring the European Union to get gas and oil products at much higher prices elsewhere, which has had a very damaging effect to the economy. The Russian economy has continued to grow bigger than that of the Western Union. So you see across the board, everything that we've done now with this latest capper of the military alliance between Russia and North Korea, and there's a similar engagement with Russia and Iran. And of course, we've talked many times about the BRIC on the economic front. That has now expanded because of how we've tried to use sanctions and everything else. You see the bottom line here. You see this trend. Everything we have done to try and, quote, win the war has backfired. So we were worse off economically. We're worse off militarily than we were before. And our enemies are stronger than they were and more united than they were. That is the hardcore truth that's unambiguous about this. Now, there can be some quibbling about who started what and who did what. That's fair game. What's not fair game, though, is to recognize that because we refused, not failed, but refused to end this war at any of the points that were available, either right before, right after, or in the year or two following the start of this, every time we had an opportunity to have a negotiated settlement, we refused. And now it looks like that refusal and that stubbornness and that stiff-necked is going to continue right on till the very end. Now, here is I don't think I put him on before, maybe once or twice. Retired General Kimmett was on a recent examination of this current battlefield, and he's going to show the curious position of many in the West. First of all, he's going to be saying that he thinks it's a frozen conflict, which it's not, and I'll show you why in a minute. But then, oddly enough, in explaining why he thinks it's a frozen conflict, he actually provides evidence that one side actually is winning.
I think it'd be accurate to say that neither side is winning, nor is either side losing. But if you talk about the ability to replace those forces, it is clear that the Ukrainians are losing capability at a faster rate than the Russians are losing capability.
What, what does that even mean? For someone who's a retired general, and he was actually a high-ranking official, if I'm not mistaken, in the Department of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense for something I can't recall, but he had some title. And he's sitting there telling the camera straight up, neither side is winning or losing, but one side is losing. And they don't have enough personnel. They don't have enough ammunition. They don't have enough weapons. Of course, they have virtually no air power, very insufficient amounts of air defense. I mean, upon what basis does he make that? Does he make that claim that there's no one winning or losing? And then you yourself make the case that even if it was only in the personnel category, and of course there are many others, but you see, you can't fight a war of attrition when one side is heavily lopsided in the amount of personnel, especially trained personnel, than the other side. It's an absolute inevitability that the other side's going to win. But that's even really going forward here. Now, Gary, if you could throw that chart up there, we've had a couple of times from the New York Times showing how, I think since November 2022. So now 2 full years, you see the red on this top of this graph is territory gained by the Russians, and the blue on the bottom is territory retaken by the Ukraine side. Now you see they had some success in 2022, and then with their 2023 offensive, they had a bunch more at the outset, but then you see that petered away before the summer was even fully out, and since that time, it has been nothing but nonstop territorial acquisition. And that last one there was I think 164, if I'm not mistaken, square kilometers of territory in the month of October alone. And that pace has continued on. And in fact, it's probably accelerated. Once we get the full details for the month of this month here of November, we're probably going to find that that trend on that graph continues on. So whether you're talking about personnel, whether you're talking about territory lost, there is just no question that one side is losing the war and one side is definitely winning. So one would have to wonder then, why would you want to continue fighting a war that is effectively already lost, and daily the truth and the reality of that loss is egregiously displayed on the battlefield and destroyed lives and cities? Why would you want to keep going it on? Now, I'm going to show you something that this is from American side. Here's something from a Kiev media site. It's Kiev Independent. They put together a report that very frankly talked about the situation, specifically talking about the manpower here. Now, I'm going to have to read this because the English is underneath. They had music on this, and we can't put that on the show without it possibly getting us demonetized and having some other problems. So I'm going to put this on here because it was too important to leave off. Gary, if you can throw that video up. This is what the reporter says. Full-scale war has left the fact that much of Russia's success continues due to its overwhelming numbers of advantage in both manpower, ammunition, and equipment. Leveraging these advantages, Russian forces continue to refine the practice of targeting weak points in the Ukrainian lines manned by poorly trained, poorly equipped, or simply more exhausted brigades. In doing so, they can advance forward in sectors with less resistance, eventually outflanking and compromising the positions held by more combat-effective brigades. So you see that he's laying it out there. This is a Kiev guy, definitely for the Kiev side, definitely against the Russian side, but he is finally just saying, this is the truth of it. Whether you're talking personnel, equipment, ammunition, we just don't have it. The Russian sides have every bit of that, and they're continuing to move forward. Now, you would think that any rational person, the next thing we would show would be, okay, the Ukrainians recognize this, and so now, especially with Trump coming in, golden opportunity to say, let's have a negotiated settlement. But instead, we have President Volodymyr Zelensky coming on and saying, I'm really not sure what he's saying. Here, watch this and make the assessment for yourself.
Наша вдячність кожному партнеру у світі, всім політичним та громадським лідерам, які дбають про те, щоб справжня дипломатія спрацювала. Ми абсолютно чітко розуміємо, без сили дипломатія немає перспективи, але і без чіткого розуміння дипломатичних цілей зброя всю роботу не зробить. Саме тому сила і дипломатія повинні працювати разом. І тільки так, щоб мир став надійним, і щоб не було повторення такої війни. І це реально.
Now, it sounds like, I mean, number one, that is one of the first times that I remember him since the second month of war ever saying anything that says, yeah, diplomacy is needed here. And you can't just do it with weapons. That's one of the first times that he has at least publicly admitted, well, we can't win this war on the battlefield. So we're going to have to go to diplomacy. Good step one, but then 2 steps backwards. Because now he's still trying to hold on to this fantasy that somehow, if the West just keeps giving them stuff, that they'll be able to have a negotiated settlement and end the war, but something that's acceptable to their side, or even beneficial to their side, so that we can have security, so that there won't be any future war. Folks, that day is gone. That train left the station years ago. There were opportunities to have such a negotiated settlement. The last, and probably history is going to show, was the best opportunity Ukraine ever had was in the November-December 2022 timeframe, after they had just routed Russia out of the north in the Kursk, the Kharkiv area, and had driven them out of Kherson city and across the Dnieper River. At that time, Russia was at its weakness. They had just mobilized super fast 300,000 troops. They were literally throwing guys almost from the time that they got to the training stations, put them in some uniforms and threw them up there as fast as they could, just to try and stem the tide, slow the bleed down. And Russia was just in a complete disarray. Their defense industrial base was only just beginning to put in the orders, and it was a long way away from doing anything. They still had not dug defensive lines, what turned into the 5 Surovikin lines. None of that had been done yet. So they were at their weakest point. That was the best time. And I give him credit, even though I call him out on several other things. Then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said so publicly. He goes, if anybody wanted to negotiate, now would be a really good time, because Russia was weak, at their weakest point, and the Ukraine side had just had their biggest victory. And at that time, they could have had a deal. If Zelensky had said this exact same thing at that time that he's saying right now, it would have made sense, and it would be a very plausible outcome. You probably could get a relatively good position and deal now than you could have gotten at any other time. But he didn't. As a matter of fact, then they got drunk with expectations, and they got high on the belief that, wow, we just had this big win here. We'll just keep going and drive them all the way out. And for a fact that all that did was feed his desire to have this offensive in 2023. The West was only too enthusiastic to help him to get behind it. We gave them thousands of armored vehicles and other vehicles of war, millions of shells of artillery, thousands of missiles, rockets, anti-aircraft support, etc. Even a number of Soviet fighters. We gave some addition to those. Lots of things, lots of equipment there, and training, physical training, NATO support training, intelligence support, targeting support, literally everything you could have. All of that led to the offensive in 2023 that started on June the 5th, I believe, was the jump off date, and it completely crashed. It was utterly ineffective. And that was the next time that the West should have said, okay, we got to acknowledge reality. We did the very best they could. They had a good end of 2022. We gave them every shot for this offensive to try and drive Russia out. Absolutely crippled. Didn't even break through the first line fully anywhere. Didn't even reach any additional lines. So that should end it. By any rational assessment, that's what the West should have done it then. And instead, that's when we really started going full on fantasy mode. That nope, we're going to ignore all of these failures and the fact that the Ukraine side lost so many men, and that now Russia is getting volunteers. They didn't have to do any more forced mobilizations like the Ukraine side continues to this day. They had all these people volunteering, some months allegedly up to 40,000 volunteered. Now it's getting harder because they've had a lot of people in. They've raised the size of their army 500,000 from what it was the day that it went into war. And by all estimations, that number continues to grow. So now then, Russia recognizes all of those factors. And now on top of that, we just had a vote for a change in administration. We're having Trump coming in, who expressly has stated that his intent to have a negotiated settlement. So with all that given, You got to say, okay, what is the current administration going to do between the 70 some odd days between now and the transfer of power on January the 20th of 2025? One would think they would say, okay, let's just kind of maintain the status quo. Let's work with the incoming administration, see where they're going to be taking this so that there's a smooth, seamless transition from the American policy from one to the next, that something's going to make sense. That's what we should do. But instead, here is Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, saying something different.
President Biden made clear when President Zelensky was here in Washington a couple of months ago that we would spend all of the resources that were provided to us by the Congress on time and in full, meaning that by January 20th, we will have sent the full amount of resources and aid to Ukraine that Congress has authorized. And of course, President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to the Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe. And ultimately, as the Japanese prime minister said, if we walk away from Ukraine in Europe, the question about America's commitment to our allies in Asia will grow.
Walk away from Ukraine. Well, listen, let me tell you what that means. That shows you that the delusion remains fully and deeply ingrained, and they just cannot learn from mistakes, because that implies that there is a path to military success. And if only the next administration would follow our lead and just keep giving them stuff for as long, at some point, I guess, things would just turn around. Only that's not how war works. That's not how this situation, that's not what reality looks like. Because all you're going to be doing by saying, let's just flood the zone with more stuff here, they don't have the personnel. Do you not look at the reports? Do you not watch the Daniel Davis deep dive? Maybe your intelligence services aren't giving you the right information, but at least you can get it here. I'm being sarcastic, of course. He does know these things. Our intelligence communities does produce exceptional quality stuff. Now, the interpretation, especially as it goes up the line, is something that is called into question, but that information is most assuredly there. That report from the Kiev Independent I just put up there, that's open source stuff. And you don't even have to have that to self-evidently see it. The New York Times provided the evidence of the continuing and the increasing collapse of territory on the Ukraine side. So then by what metric, by what ration and logic can the current administration say that, no, we can't abandon Ukraine? Let me tell you he talks about if we don't do that our allies will, question the integrity and the commitment of the United States. Let me tell you how it's more likely. If Trump did what they're suggesting, if they had won and continued on, that's when the question about America's commitment and intelligence would come into play, because people all over the world see that this war is already over, that it's not winnable by any stretch. And in fact, it's very likely that the Ukraine can't even avoid outright military defeat, no matter what the West does. So the only rational course is to have a negotiated settlement to get the best terms you can, and they're not going to be very good. But that's what rationale would understand. And if we did what Jake Sullivan there suggested, then people around the world, to include our adversaries and our allies, would think, what in the hell is wrong with the senior American political leadership? That they think that there's something here, that they think this is something we should fund, that we should get behind. I mean, it makes no sense at all. And you've certainly heard the likes of Viktor Orban or Fico out of Slovakia or Erdogan out of Turkey. There's a lot of people who are asking those questions. And I think those questions are only going to grow now. But they may be tempered at the moment, because by all evidence, President Trump is getting ready to come in, and he is going to bring some sanity to this. I have some access to some of the people who are on the Trump transition team, and some of the people that are being talked about at the very highest levels are very encouraging, frankly. And I'm really hopeful. I'm ready to see some official announcement. I know that a lot of things are going on behind the scenes, and a lot of different camps are trying to get Trump's ear to try to make some, to try to make their pitch for why their person's going to be the best. So we'll see how that comes out. But at least a lot of the names I'm hearing is very optimistic, and makes me think that he's going to actually do some of the things he said, especially when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. But one of the camps that's also trying to get Trump's ear it's almost like saying that the Democratic administration wasn't going far enough. And this whole neocon world that we talk about, unfortunately, too many times because it's necessary. They're going all out to try and push their agenda here and hope that Trump goes in. Now, I just showed you what the current administration did and how they're detached from reality because they don't recognize what's happening on the ground. Watch this by Jack Keane, and you'll see a different area of unreality.
The global security challenges that we're facing, they are the most serious, the most dangerous, and the most challenging we have had since World War II. And I do believe that we're in a pre-war era leading to global war. That is the status that we're facing. The good news here is that all of these adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who are cooperating, collaborating, and coordinating together in a degree that exceeded the expectations of all of our intelligence agencies, by the way, and they have been honest about that appraisal. The fact of the matter is they have to reassess, Mark, based on this election that's taken place, because they have been acting so aggressively, so assertively, because they believe that our leadership in the United States is weak, that we've lost the political will to confront them, much less go and fight them. And I'm convinced that President Trump knows that World War III is in the future, as you just described it, and that we have got to take action to restore deterrence in dealing with our adversaries.
It boggles the mind, the logic that these folks try to apply. Now, I just painted you a very clear picture of why all of these folks, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, why they have been moving together, and our actions have been compelling them because they don't have any other alternative, because we take nothing but provocative actions in every theater. We don't talk as much about the Indo-Pacific, but that probably will change. We'll probably start doing more of that because that is a sore spot as well. And some of the last 4 years, we've been taking some really bad actions in there that have undermined our security and actually given more and more incentive for these folks to come together. And instead of recognizing that our aggressive actions and our supporting war against Russia and the killing of Russian people, and how he doesn't get that that's causing them to look elsewhere to get more and more help. Like we've had this big 50 conglomeration of countries that meets at Ramstein every month to give stuff to the Ukraine side. They're doing the same thing on the other side, reaching out to folks that are providing a lot of support on their side. Those things are one action is causing the other. And instead of recognizing that and saying, hey, maybe it would be cool if we used diplomacy to try and whittle away and erode the motivation these guys have to work together. Because each of these groups, they all have things that are not really congruous with each other and their points of friction. But those things are covered over right now because they're points of unified reason and rationale of being opposed by us is overwhelming all these others. If you start to erode that one, then some of these other natural divisions between them can start to rise to the surface. See, the wise person says, okay, I want to solve problems for my country and create opportunity for my country at the lowest possible cost, get it done at the lowest level, and with the highest rate of return on our side. Anytime you're talking about the use of war, you are almost automatically talking about two sides fighting and killing each other. So you can try to kill your way to victory on one side, guaranteeing that they're going to try to kill you back in return. Or you can say, hey, maybe diplomacy is the way to go here. Maybe we can have a negotiated settlement, get the killing off the table, and start to work on some other things that preserves our freedom and independence around the world, that preserves our fighting force and stops this bleed that's going on with all of these folks we keep supporting. God help us if we actually also get involved. And also that it preserves our chance to have economic prosperity, to expand economic markets. And anytime we give other countries, even adversaries, an economic incentive to work with us, even if they don't like us politically or so, they can say, all right, well, there's some advantage to us. It works to our mutual advantage to go here. So sure, I'll take that path. That is immensely, overwhelmingly the priority, should be the priority for the United States. And listen, I'll just be honest. One of the reasons why I'm intrigued and hopeful that the Trump administration is that one of the names, at least as of this time, is being kicked around for Secretary of State is Tulsi Gabbard. we've had her on our show before. We've talked about some of the things she's done. She's made some great statements and speeches of late. And I think she is so aligned with what Trump wants, and she's got a great opportunity if she was given that position to be able to operationalize it and do many of the things we're talking about here, because she is sharply focused as a military veteran, as someone who's deployed into combat zones before. Actually, she's still a serving lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. So she understands about war very clearly. And she also understands about what's diplomatically possible. And so she definitely would say, this is the direction we want to go in light of what Trump has said. He has already stated on the Russia-Ukraine war. Somebody like that could help bring it into operation. So I'm very hopeful that at least if it's not Tulsi Gabbard, it's somebody who's just like that, because that's where America needs to go. And one of the other things that I am heartened by is who won't be the Secretary of State. And President Trump on his Truth Social made an announcement, I guess, a couple of days ago now. He said, I will not be inviting former Ambassador Nikki Haley or former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to join the Trump administration, which is currently in the formation. Then he goes on to say he really enjoyed them. Both of them have said in statements that come after that, they're trying to, I guess, not alienate Trump and maybe hopeful for something later. But they said, well, we've enjoyed our time working together. But you see birds of a feather right there. I mean, they really are the war couple there, and they're even color coordinated in that picture there. But that's such an iconic photo there, because nobody loves war more than these two here. We showed something that Mike Pompeo said I think it was less than 2 weeks ago, and I was just egregious and beside myself of how does he call himself a diplomat? And yet he's like eschewing any kind of diplomacy and just outright advocating for war. He sounded more like the Minister of War than a Secretary of State. And of course, Nikki Haley didn't ever meet a war she didn't like. And, and she was the U.S. ambassador to the UN. I mean, every bit as bad as John Bolton, which, makes it more difficult our job internationally when, we want to try to have diplomatic relations where people work with us, where we give people a reason to want to support us, to where we look for win-win opportunities and not just this coercive, in-your-face kind of you're with me or against me. You either do what I say or we're going to bomb you. That kind of mentality that doesn't win friends. That sometimes that gets unwilling coercion and acquiescence in certain ways, but only to the absolute minimum that's required. And they won't put any extra effort in it. It makes so much more sense if we can say, hey, it's going to be a new era, a new day. And we're now looking for win-win situations. We're now looking to expand our influence where people want to work with us. Imagine that. Wouldn't that be a pleasant change? We'll wait to see how all this comes out once President Trump has announced his national security team and all of his key leaders once he takes office, and then we get a chance to finally see what kind of actions President Trump is going to take. Then we'll assess that at the time. But at least there is a genuine opportunity and opening here that there could be a big difference. Now, I will say in closing here, specifically about the Russia-Ukraine war, the situation is going to be more difficult, I think, than President Trump may realize, because Putin has his own domestic issues at stake here. And it's not commonly understood in the West, but there is a war hawk kind of version over there, a neocon type pressure there on his Politburo and some of his senior advisors. Putin is always characterized as being a dictator and all this kind of stuff, but it's actually not quite that way. He is the president of the state, but there are other entities and power industries, power centers that actually have influence, and he does have to listen to some of those, unlike what many think. And there is a significant move there that says, hey, forget about the West. We remember what happened when they said they would never come an inch, to the east. They would never put any troops in the former Warsaw Pact countries when NATO expanded it, and they did. They said they wouldn't do this, and they did, and all this kind of stuff. They say, yeah, we remember the Minsk agreements when you promised and signed your name that would solve the Ukraine situation in 2015. And they say that was abandoned. And then a lot of these deals that have been negotiated, arms limitations treaties and several other kind of things that have been abrogated since. These people are saying you can't trust America. You can't believe what they say because they'll go back on it the minute that it doesn't suit them. And that's part of the baggage that we're going to have to deal with. And so depending on how influential those folks are with Putin, he may say, I hear you, President Trump. I'd like to make a deal with you, but here's the terms, and they're pretty harsh. And it may be even more territory than the current line of contact. So right now, people are thinking freeze the war on its current lines, then have a ceasefire, maybe an armistice, and then over time kind of negotiated. But the problem is Russia may not be willing to do that. They may be willing to say, hey, listen, if you give me this extra territory where even right now we don't all possess, especially in the Zaporizhia and the Kherson oblasts, which Russia annexed in 2022, but they don't occupy all of it. But Putin may say, at a minimum, you're going to have to abandon all of that territory, withdraw all your forces, and then we might talk about that being a line, or even want more. But if Putin feels like that they can create a larger territory, a bigger buffer zone for their side, and that he maybe even take, I'm speculating here, many are talking about this, like the port city of Odessa or Kharkiv city. Certainly some in the Russian side have been very outspoken that should be the minimum of what the Russians settle for. And if they can't win at negotiations, then they don't have to trust the U.S. or the West. They'll just take it on the battlefield. That remains to be seen, because that would be a very, very bloody fight that would cost a tremendous amount of Russian forces and everything else. And so who knows whether they would go down that path or not. But that is the difficulty that the Trump administration is going to have coming in. So it may be a lot tougher than what President Trump is expecting, because Putin may push a hard line here. Additionally, Trump is going to have to be careful domestically, because he's got a lot of domestic issues he wants to get done, and he needs political capital for those. So he would be challenged if he has to give Putin everything he asked for, because then that could undercut his Trump's domestic agenda and his credibility at home. So he can't be seen as just being a literal puppet to Putin and giving everything he wants. Otherwise, he's going to have a harder time getting the things done domestically. So there's a lot of difficult times. And even though they're bringing in what looks to be a good team here, and they're keeping out some of the bad folks, there's a lot of difficulty coming up. So I don't want to overstate, that things are going to suddenly turn rosy on January 21st. But certainly they're moving in the right direction. It's much, much better than to continue on with fiction, in which case things could get a lot worse for the United States. So we'll continue to watch this. We'll continue to monitor it, bring you everything that happens in between now and then. And right now, we thank you for watching Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Please join us with Larry Johnson at noon tomorrow. Thank you very much.